Let's talk about Venezuela. Now, for context, I've done stories in the past about Venezuela, and very often there's a contingent on the left that defends the Venezuelan authoritarian dictatorship. And there's this sort of triad, there's an overlap. There's a contingent of the American left that likes to defend Russia, never exactly clear why, defend Venezuela, and criticize Israel in a way that sort of goes beyond reasonable policy criticisms into a more unhinged and apoplectic apologia, for lack of a better term. And very often they criticize the Venezuelan opposition as being terrorists or puppets of the American CIA. They sort of portray the Bolivaran regime, formerly led by Hugo Chavez, now by President Nicolas Maduro, as just a great thing for the people. And meanwhile, we've seen incredible reporting over the last week. Not that much in the American media, I would say, but I've been watching a lot of South American coverage of what's going on in Venezuela from outside of Venezuela. So, for example, really good piece on Sunday night. There's an Argentinian journalist, Jorge Lanata, who does a show every Sunday night. He was in Venezuela. He was actually deported immediately upon arrival, ended up having to fly to Panama, Houston, and ultimately to get back to Argentina on a United Airlines flight. I mean, just crazy what's been going on there. And they are very clearly showing us that 90-year-old women standing in the heat in line for hours, waiting for a single bag of rice. There's barely any toilet paper in the country. A loaf of bread, if it's even available, costs what you might earn in a day, if not several days, on the average salary there. And it is total and utter chaos right now, and it's only escalating, okay? Venezuelan authorities seized two opposition leaders, okay, Leopoldo Lopez and Antonio Ledezma, both of whom were under house arrest for prior convictions. Those prior convictions are a story in and of themselves, of course. Their house arrest had been revoked because authorities said they're planning to flee. Now, if you don't understand what's going on in Venezuela in terms of the lack of press freedom, the lack of judicial independence, the lack of law enforcement independence, you might hear, oh, listen, they broke the conditions, they were planning to flee, so they were arrested. That's the sickness of it all. People hear about this report about these two opposition leaders being arrested, and they think, well, listen, they were legitimately convicted by an independent judicial system, carried out, but the arrests were carried out by an independent law enforcement system, and it's all on the up and up. Far from it. And all of this is related to President Nicolas Maduro calling for elections this past Sunday. The elections were boycotted by the opposition. Almost everyone elected to the legislative body are supporters of Maduro, which I'm sure comes as a huge surprise. And meanwhile, the United States has placed new sanctions specifically on the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, putting sanctions in to freeze his assets, at least the ones that are subject to American jurisdiction. U.S. citizens are also barred from dealing with Nicolas Maduro, according to the Treasury Department. Now, some on the left will hear about what's going on in Venezuela, and I'm already seeing them online, and they will say, oh, David, the CIA and U.S. agencies have a long history of messing up Latin American countries. Maduro is still better than whatever the neoliberal American community would install in Venezuela. Let's hold on a second, right? These are separate issues. I know about the U.S. messing up Latin American countries and their priorities being at odds with those of the people of many Latin American countries. I was born in Argentina. I follow South American politics very, very closely. So that's fine. That's a perfectly reasonable and fact-based position to take. That does not get us to Maduro as a savior and the opposition are terrorists installed by the American CIA. We've seen allegations that the opposition in Venezuela is ringers or that the opposition is faking the bad acts by the government to make them look bad, right? A sort of false flag or something. All of those arguments could have anecdotal grains of truth, but the narrative constructed from it is completely bogus. And another one is it's AstroTurf. The protests, the opposition protests are AstroTurf paid for by the United States. There is really good reporting from other countries about what's going on in Venezuela. And I would implore you, A lot of these are subtitled when you look at them on YouTube for people who don't understand Spanish. Check out what's happening on the ground there and find out for yourself, whether or not you can point to one protest in Venezuela that was U.S. sponsored, whatever that means. And it's very hard to prove a negative, as we know. There are endless protests and opposition activism in Venezuela that have no connection whatsoever to American money. So I'm really concerned about what's going on there from a humanitarian perspective. But I'm also really concerned about this string on the American left. And this is the same people that are denying any Trump-Russia collusion, despite the fact that we now have Trump lying about Trump Jr.'s statement and drafting it, and in-person intent to collude via a meeting with a Russian lawyer. I mean, it's endless, right? The same contingent that is pretending that there's nothing to see there is often the same contingent that is defending Venezuela as some amazing example of democratic socialism. And the truth is that it is far from it. It is a right-wing authoritarian regime. Send me your thoughts. I know many of you will disagree. Many will say David's a shill for who I don't know, because I don't even know what it is that the CIA has said about this. I frankly don't care. What I care about is what is actually happening in Venezuela. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. I'm thrilled to tell you that today's episode of the show is made possible in part by Tagadab, the hosting specialists, offering dedicated virtual private and cloud server solutions, as well as custom server solutions for whatever business or project you have. Tagadab's web hosting services support a very wide range of customers and businesses that includes bloggers, tech startups, financial traders, gamers, web developers. It's a very, very long list. They've got a user-friendly interface. They have absolutely fantastic technical support. Over 70% of their business comes from repeat orders and recommendations from existing customers. You can get a 20 British pound discount off of a cloud server account with Tagadab, but you've got to know how to access that. And the way you access it is by going to signup.tagadab.com/TDPS and using the coupon code TDPS20. This is a great way to get great hosting for your project, business, or service, and support the David Pakman Show, and support our advertisers. That's signup.tagadab.com/TDPS. That's TAGADAB. And then the discount code is TDPS20.